Welcome to the table, everyone. Wherever you are, we are so glad that you are here as well. And just to get us all in the same place at the same time, we wanted to open with a little meditation to still your heart and quiet your mind and bring us all truly together. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be.
the end of myself. And this has been the longest road. Just when my hallelujah was dead, you gave me a new song, and I'm letting go. I'm letting go. I'm letting go. Falling into you. I confess I still get scared sometimes. Then the perfect love comes rushing, and all the lies that screamed inside go silent the moment you begin, and I'm letting go. I'm letting go.
I need to keep watching that.
I'm letting go. Falling into you, and I'm letting go. I'm letting go. I'm letting go. Falling into you. You remind me of things forgotten. You align me till I'm totally undone, and with your arms around me, fear has no match for your love. Now you've won me, and you remind me of things forgotten. You unwind me till I'm totally undone, and with your arms around me, fear has no match for your love. Now you want me. Oh, I'm letting go. I'm letting go. I'm letting go. Falling into you. Tastes so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word, just to rest upon His promise, just to know thus says the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I proved Him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace. precious Jesus. Oh, for grace to trust Him more.
God goes, belonging to every broken thing He's made, sing His being simply by being the thing it is. Stone and tree and sky, man who sees and sings and wonders why God goes. Belonging to every broken thing He's made means a storm of peace. Think of the atoms inside the stone. Think of the man who sits alone, trying to will himself into a stillness where God goes, belonging. To every broken thing He's made, there is given one shade shaped exactly to the thing itself. Under a tree, a darker tree. Under the man, only the man to see. God goes, belonging to every broken thing. He's made the things that bring Him near, made the mind that makes Him go, a part of what man knows, apart from what man knows. God goes, belonging to every broken thing He's made.
Thanks, Ryan. Jesus, we just want to thank you for time where we can spend centered around who you are and what you do in us, in our community, in our relationships, God, where we can celebrate the good, even amidst the chaos, amidst the change, the tensions, and the distance between us. And that these moments, I pray that you would connect us. God, connect us to the source and how you move inside of us. How do you still us when we are busy trying to figure out how to solve things? How you quiet our hearts when we are screaming in chaos? How you come beside us and sit with us when we are lonely and we feel disconnected, God. Right now we celebrate together the truth that we are a part of something bigger than our small life alone by itself. We are a part of a creation story. We are a part of a love story, a part of a redemption story, a part of reaching people who need to know the love and the grace of Jesus. We are a part of a community that can come together even when walls separate us, God, even when differences and changes in our culture separate us, God. Even when safety separates us, there is a common ground of love and everyone that we can share. Would you remind us of that this week when we are lonely, when we are scared, when we are trying to fix everything in our own power, or we are feeling powerless, God? Would you bring us back to this bond of love? Would you bring us back to communion and community and connection with you and with each other? We love you so much and thank you for this time. Thank you for what you're doing in our hearts, God, even when it's hard to understand, even when it's hard to operate in a new way. Thank you, God, that you are good and you are love and you are our source. It's in your name that we pray all these things. Amen.
Thank you so much, Ryan and Mindy and Maggie. That was really beautiful. And good evening, and welcome to uh, all of you, our listeners, our people that we love so much. I wish I could hug all your faces yet again, but alas, here we are. You might be wondering why we aren't at Pleasant Valley. And that is, of course, all the social distancing measures. We want to do our part to to stop the spread of this virus. And many of us are having to still like go to work or do various things out and around. And so we just want to make sure that we're, protecting families and taking care of each other in that way. So anyway, that's why we're kind of doing it in this way. But I'm really grateful. A huge shout out and thank you to Gary Miner this week for helping us get like just all this whole setup going. And so thank you so much, Gary. But yeah, so welcome to the table. It's super good to be with you all. And before I jump in, I wanted to mention just a few, I guess they're basically announcements. So there are kind of two ways that we still have to stay connected. The first is we call them meetups. They're basically our small groups, and those are still basically happening. They're just meeting online. So, of course, one of the dangers of everything we're going through right now is that sense of loneliness, of disconnection, and depression. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're not connecting with a meetup, to do that. If you don't have a place to find some community, a place to share, that's really, really important right now. So what you can do is either just comment below in the live stream feed, or just kick myself or the table a direct message through Facebook and just say, hey, I'd love to connect with a meetup, and we'll get you connected. The other way that we're trying to stay connected is through, I send basically a weekly, not only an email, but also a text to each person who's kind of a part of our community or loosely connected. And so it's just, I send basically it can be, usually it's a prayer or a quote and just something encouraging, uplifting. And it's a way for me to kind of check in on people. So at any rate, if you'd like to receive that, then again, just comment below or kick the table a message, and we'll make sure that you get on that list. All right, so we are in part 3 of our incredibly timely series, Tranquility, Cultivating Calm in a Crazy World. And the premise of this whole series is basically that it's stress that destroys our tranquility. Some of you are experiencing that in your lives right now. Maybe the majority of us are experiencing this. And it's stress, it results from really from that sense of worry, even a sense of speed and kind of overwork that lies just at the root of so much of our anxiety and our like depression, and just that that general sense of like unhappiness that pervades so many of our lives now. And so what we need to do, even here and now, you might say especially here and now in this kind of season, is learn healthier ways of living and relating to ourselves, to others, to God. And so that leads me to my message tonight, which is titled simply Rest. And there's an ancient story in the early chapters of the book of Genesis. If you're following along in your Bible, you can go to Genesis chapter, it's sort of 1, and then I'm going to quote from the end of chapter 2. And most people, a lot of people, get kind of lost arguing over this text, like over its kind of scientific merit. And honestly, it seems to me that this text, it's pretty clearly a mythopoetic account of creation. What I mean by that is it's not, like its point is not scientific accuracy, but capital T, truth in a much bigger and broader sense. It's trying to speak to like the truth of who God is, who we are in relationship to him. Now, having said that, I must admit that the account here is eerily similar to what science in the last 100 plus years or so has taught us about creation, in that basically it names that God created the world in ever higher orders of complexity and beauty. First, there was like light and darkness. And then there was sky. And then the sky lit up with lights, like planets and stars and moons. And then, of course, there were waters. And then the dry land. And then the dry land produced vegetation. And then the living creatures came, first in the waters, and then in the air. And then animals and creeping things upon the dry ground. And then finally, on the sixth day, God created humankind in his own image. And you might think that that's the high point of the story, that God then declared, the sixth day holy because, well, we human beings, we are part of the sixth day. But no, the story actually continues that it was what day? The next day, the seventh day, that's the day that God blessed. It was the seventh day that God declared holy, sacred, wonderful, the pinnacle. Now, this begs the question, why? Why the seventh day? Why not our day? Why not day 6? Well, Genesis chapter 2, verse 3 names it very clearly. It says, then God blessed the seventh, the Sabbath day, and made it holy, because on it he rested. So every few weeks, well, at my worst, it's every week, but at my best, it's like every few months. So I'll just average it out and I'll just say every few weeks, I reach this point of depletion. I've alluded to this in previous messages in this series. I'm sort of like a bucket whose water has all been poured out. I remember a few months ago this happened. I was helping to lead our previous church community through a time of discernment regarding the full inclusion of LGBTQ folks in the life of the church. And for all of its beauty, it was also very difficult and stressful. And then at the same time, I had a big fight with a wonderful friend. And isn't it interesting how stress in our lives, it isn't just about the hours we work, but about the relational dynamics in your life. So I had those things going on. And then, of course, as many of you know, I was coaching soccer on top of all that. And in this particular weekend, I just had multiple soccer games. I was just stressed out to the max. And so it was like a Friday, and I was kind of nearing the end of my work week. And yet I looked at my to-do list, and I had so much yet to do. It was Friday morning, but I'm looking at this list like, oh my gosh. And so I'm sitting there at my laptop, and I could not bring myself to begin. Has anyone ever been there? Like, I open up my laptop, it's just sitting there, and I'm just there with my hands on the keyboard, not typing, just staring. Now, whether it's because of stress or sickness or exhaustion, I think this is something many people can relate to, right? This sense of, I need to get going, but I have nothing left. Like you're done. D-O-N-E, done. That's where I was. And in these moments, it's the craziest thing, but this irrational fear, it just like creeps into my mind. And this is the fear that, Brett, this is now forever. This is your new life. You are the guy who can get nothing done. You will be wildly inefficient for the rest of your days. You must now accept this as your new normal. And in despair, I was there, and I just closed my laptop, and I left my office, and I went home. I mean, what could I do? Like, literally nothing. And so that's exactly what I did. Nothing productive. Now, I wish I could say I went on a prayer retreat to renew myself, but actually I went on a Netflix retreat because sometimes I'll try to read, but in this case, I was so depleted, I couldn't even read books. Like, reading books was too much energy. I just had no energy. And so I just lay there, and like, 8 hours passes. And then, like, I don't know how many, 12, 14. Finally, it's like bedtime. I go to sleep. I wake up the next day. I just keep resting like 20 hours, 24 hours. And then suddenly, as if by magic, it lifts. Now, why? Rest. I simply needed to rest. Now, what's the principle here? If you and I are not intentional about resting, if you and I are not tuned into our bodies and learning to yield to the warning signals of fatigue, eventually that they will force us to a grinding halt. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually it will happen. It's almost as though, call me crazy, God has created the world, you and I, for healthy rhythms of work and rest. Now, you say, yes, Brett, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the Sabbath, the whole 6 days I work, the 7th day I rest. Yes, I think that's a good rhythm, Brett. I agree. And in fact, I even kind of try to follow that, take weekends off and such. Yes, the whole we work 6 days and then we rest type of rhythm, I think that's a great principle. And in fact, I just want to kind of name for this message that should be a clear takeaway, right, from this sermon is every week should have its day of rest. That's true. Every week should have its day of rest. But that's not actually the point of my message tonight. You see, because what Americans do with this, and I include myself very much in this critique, is we say, okay, yes, 6 days of work and 1 of rest. So I am now going to run myself into the ground for 6 days, and then I'm going to recover for 1 day. In other words, I'm going to abuse my brain and body and be profoundly unhealthy for 6 days, and then I'll take a day to obey God. All right, so I just want to name this very clearly, that the Sabbath, this whole idea of the 7th day of rest, this is not intended to be a trip to the spiritual ICU after a week of abusing your body and mind. Isn't that such a profoundly American way of viewing the Sabbath? So let me give you these are two quick, very Western, very American, we'll call them misconceptions, misunderstandings of the Sabbath, of a day of rest. All right, so the first misconception is that I earn my day of rest by overextending myself throughout the week. Can you hear the logic there? This is the earning model. This is where, in other words, the day of rest in this kind of thinking comes, at the end of the week. So I earn it, right? I work Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then maybe Saturday, and then I get into it. It's like, okay, now it's Sunday, or whatever your day is, right? And this is the idea of kind of so I overextend in order to get to the day of rest. Now, the other kind of alternative, or the other misconception, is this sort of idea, but in the inverse. So it's that I rest so that I can then overextend myself throughout the week. God, I'm so guilty of this. So this is more my preference, right? So it's kind of like I start with rest. I've even heard preachers preach like this is kind of the spiritual way, you begin with rest. You don't end. It's not like earning. No. You begin with rest. And but where we get this twisted, right, is okay, I'm going to begin with rest again so that I can abuse my body and mind for the next 6 days and utterly exhaust myself, and then rest again. Now, these are obviously two sides of the same coin, and they're both unhealthy. Why? Well, lots of reasons. I mean, one obvious thing is that it really, and I think this point really connects with our series, is that when we do this, our stress levels rise, right? When we abuse our body and mind for 6 days, our stress levels rise, cortisol, adrenaline in our bodies go through the roof, and then because of this, our happy, tranquil chemicals go down, which leads to chronic anxiety, depression, general unhappiness. All right, so that's like the science side of it. But I want to frame it tonight more in a spiritual, relational sense. Here's why I think this matters. When we go too hard and too fast for too long, it alienates us from ourselves, from others, and from God. When we go too hard, too fast, too long, it alienates it. It brings in this sense of disconnection from myself, from the people around me, from God. And I mean, I've experienced this all the time, right? Because I'm thinking particularly of my relationships, like with Maggie, with my kids, my friends, right? When I'm so depleted, it's like I reach this point of, I'm sorry, I got nothing left, right? And this is why you and I can technically sort of keep the letter of the law when it comes to the Sabbath, and yet break the spirit of the law. So, okay, what's the answer? Like, what do we need to do? If you don't hear anything else tonight, I want you to hear this, that we need to bring the spirit of the Sabbath into the other 6 days in our lives. What do I mean by the spirit of Sabbath? I mean, it's like a spirit of a vibe of rest, of calm, of tranquility into every day, every hour, every moment. See, where even when I'm working, I'm not striving, right? That's where we want to be. Even when I'm working, I'm not striving. Even when I'm working, my soul is not straining. I'm not stressed out, but instead, I am well. Now, you might wonder, how on earth would we do that? And so let me go ahead and give you 2 suggestions tonight, 2 ways of bringing the spirit of Sabbath, the spirit of rest into like your everyday life. All right, so the first is this. You've got to resist the temptation to cram more in. I'm thinking, into your life. I love that in the poetic creation story of Genesis that I read earlier, it doesn't say that on the 7th day, the Sabbath day, God realized that he had, oh my gosh, a whole extra day. And so he made sure to maximize his efficiency. He made sure to wring every last drop of production from every moment. No, God did not use the 7th day to cram more in. My mentor, Keith Spurgeon, he put it this way. He said, fill a calendar, drain a life. In other words, there comes a point where we have like a rich life, a good life. It's full. But what happens? We're just so tempted. We're just to keep adding, right? We just keep cramming more in. This is from Dr. Archibald Hart in his wonderful book, The Anxiety Cure, that I linked to in my e-letter, I think it was 2 weeks ago. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But he says this, we are so determined to succeed that most of us try to pack each moment of the day with activity. Some of this activity is necessary if we're going to eat, raise healthy and well-fed kids, save for comfortable retirement, but we go beyond this. We are so determined to get to our destination, success, fame, recognition, wealth, that we never take time to reflect on the journey of life, to enjoy the scenery, or be grateful that we are on a journey at all. Isn't this our great temptation? To it's like we're constantly living for tomorrow, next week. Like we can be so goal-oriented, and goals aren't bad, but we can be so goal-oriented that it's like we're forever working towards getting, there. And yet in the midst, it's like we're missing the glory, the beauty all around us. We've got to resist the temptation to cram more in. We need the discipline of saying enough. In fact, some of you, probably you're like me, right? In this season, we're kind of forced not to cram as much in. And although there's real challenges to this, like some of the social isolation, and all that can be really challenging. And yet, my hunch is your calendar's less full right now. And just ask yourself, has there been an element in your life where that has actually been good? Like a good thing, right? We've got to resist the temptation to cram more in. We need the discipline of saying enough. It's enough. All right, so that's first. The second way that we can begin to bring the spirit of Sabbath into every day, every hour, every moment is quite simple, but it's not easy. Number 2, go slower. This is hard. We have such a hurry sickness. I got that language from Dr. Hart, who I quoted just a second ago. His hurry sickness. I love that phrase because that's really what it is. Like, we have such a hurry sickness in our culture. We're always trying to go faster, drive faster, type faster, read faster, email faster, just faster, faster, faster. I mean, if you want like a successful product in the world, help people either save time or go faster. And that thing will sell because we're like addicted to kind of speed. And we have this kind of hurry sickness. I love this quote. This is from the poet Jack Gilbert, and from his book of poems titled Refusing Heaven. And he wrote these words. He said, "The grand Italian churches are covered with detail, which is visible at the pace people walk by. The great modern buildings are blank because there is no time to see from the car. 1,000 years ago, when they built the gardens of Kyoto, the stones were set in the streams askew. Whoever went quickly would fall in. When we slow, the garden can choose what we notice, can change our heart." And when I think of the Lord Jesus, I think of someone who was so unhurried, someone who through the Spirit was so deeply connected to the one that he called Father, which is why he could say, "I don't do anything but what I see the Father doing. I don't say anything except what I hear the Father saying." And when we learn to slow down, when we are more present, when we through the Spirit are united with God, suddenly God chooses what we notice, who we notice, what we say, how we say it. Suddenly, God can change our hearts. And church, that's what the world needs right now. That's what our church community needs right now. That's what your family needs right now. A transformed people who don't do anything except what the Father is doing, who don't say anything except what the Father is saying. Will you bow your heads and close your eyes? Let me go ahead and pray. Lord God, would you teach us to slow down in this season where it's like we are being forced into a certain kind of slowness. And yet so often it's in the mind, God. It's the battlefield of the mind. Our minds are hurried. Our minds are still full. Our minds are still racing. And so, God, I pray for the gift of peace over every person hearing my voice right now. God, peace of mind, that they would be well in their body, well in their mind. God, help us to slow down so that you can choose what we notice. And through that, God, transform us and give us the gift. God, restore to us the gift of tranquility. Change our hearts, God. In the life-changing name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And don't forget, if you're needing some connection, and honestly, I know you are needing some connection. You may not feel it right now. In the coming weeks, you will. I encourage you, go ahead, get connected to a meetup, get connected with my prayer text. Like, just find ways to connect now before you hit the moment of crisis. So I don't say that to scare you, but just as a sober reminder, we need connection before we need it, so to speak. So you can just reach out, kick me a direct message, or the table direct message. We'll get you hooked up with that. All right, so let me send you out with this benediction. You are God's servants. You're gifted with dreams. You're gifted with visions, and upon you rests the grace of God like flame of fire. Go, love, serve the Lord in the strength of the Holy Spirit. God be with you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you, Gary, Maggie, Mindy, Ryan. Love y'all lots.
Love you guys. Bye, guys. Love you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.